Welcome to my autistic feature film. I'll be your host today.
So not the vibe!
This is my Murder Drones Total narrative retrospective. I have an obligation to warn you that this has been slowly recorded over many months, and I've learned a lot in those months of rewatches upon rewatches, so like the Murder Drone story, my retrospective might be a bit disjointed and all over the place, so I've done whatever I can to help alleviate those issues. Look at the top left for the current topic at hand. I'll try my best to add transitions, both auditory and visually, in between topics, and a lot of the points throughout the episodes are to be taken at face value for that episode when it released, and then I go over why I believe episodes stand at a certain rating as a narrative whole at the very end. So please get some snacks, get a drink, and I hope you enjoy this deep dive into the subtle storytelling of Liam Vickers' and Glitch Productions series, Murder Drones. Links to everything used down below, nerd. Alright, episode 1, the pilot. First things off the table. When it first released, it was episode 1, parentheses, pilot. Now it's episode 1, pilot, as in the pilot, referencing, in this case, N, probably because that wasn't established to begin with. N quotes that they were not taught how to fly. They did not learn how to fly the spacecraft, their landing pods. Yet, by episode 2...
I was the pilot? That's awesome! I crashed and ruined everything. Spaceship pilot. Origin story.
Let's dissect that for a moment. He doesn't remember that he was the pilot, yet he remembers that they were not told how to fly the ship. While we know that Sin has administrative access at this point and can manipulate memories to some degree,
let's reset these memories one more time.
It seems like an extremely selective thing to do, to take away knowledge that could reasonably given to someone within a very short period of time, and we don't see the extent of the mind wiping. Even later on in the series, in episode 5, when V and N mysteriously and presumably come under the effects of the Absolute Solver's attempt at mind wiping, it's all past knowledge. So the equivalent of their robotic lobotomies, but nothing selective. Because if it was such an unintrusive process that it could be selective, we never see that ever again, which is something that's just never tackled again later on in the series. There's also a lot of obvious inspirations. Hiding behind 3 doors is very much an allusion to it being Attack on Titan in space. So a lot of the things that are introduced here narratively in the pilot are really cool, but have to be taken with a grain of salt, as they probably are no longer canon. There's a lot of things that Jay says, there's a lot of things that V does that just don't line up with the greater narrative. While later episodes did address some of these concerns, the pilot is kind of in this limbo of where it isn't quite sure where it wants to be, and we kind of have admittance from Liam that the rest of the script from the show came after the pilot's success. I mean, the teaser for episode 2's release about 2 years back even has Kevin and Luke being like, well, we were not expecting the robot centipede in episode 2, which furthers the fact that there was a rough draft for the pilot, and that was kind of it.
The audience, what episode 2 originally was going to be.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It was going
to be very different. Yeah.
Originally, none of the drones, because they're robots, like none of them were going to wear any clothes. I was keeping you guys on your toes. We can do pants.
Of course.
Technology's amazing. We
The
can
old
do anything.
Liam switcheroo.
Oh, very smart.
Yeah.
I remember Murder Drones used to be like very different from its inception.
I would consider it a a loosely strung together series of set pieces.
And the reason why people think that there were secret rewrites throughout the show's lifespan, considering that Gooseworks stated that with her show, The Amazing Digital Circus, she needed a rough draft for an entire season before they would even attempt to animate the pilot.
I feel kind of bad. In my
the
plans,
OCs.
Zubul doesn't get much screen time in episode 2 either. But don't worry, episode 3 is the Zubul episode.
Have you seen the
assuming we get funded for a whole season?
Oh yeah, just a heads up. Like, Goose is writing and developing Digital Circus. Like, she's already writing stuff and things like that. We haven't obviously confirmed the season yet, but like, we still want her to go and explore the world and come up with stuff.
It sounds like what rule was implemented because of you sort of thing. Jay's fervence for a company that, looking back, she knows no longer exists is a really moot plot point, and really felt like they were trying to establish the disassembly drones are units of mankind's design initially. To clarify, this is one of those points where, as we learn more in this series, it makes it even worse, which is one of the few times this happens, because Jay hates N. She has no reason to lie to protect him with this false idea that they're working for the company, or that she needs a reason to execute him. And the only potential reason it could be is Sin obviously favors N and wants to keep him safe and secure. Obviously, he can't be made awares of what has currently happened. But in all scenes that Sin is next to Jay, they seem extraordinarily well off, extremely buddy-buddy. There's no tension, there's no fear. The only fear that Jay has is explaining to V how she was as well tricked.
If I promised you anything, you tricked me too.
So all intents and purposes, it sounds like for the most part, especially with Jay corresponding with Sin throughout the entire series, that there really was no reason to lie to N or to even hold back on just killing him at various points throughout their pre-story moments. Because she knows death can't stop anything, that they always come back. V is entirely written to 100% just not reciprocate feelings to N. It isn't until later that she starts really acting like a jealous ex when it comes to Uzi. And even that's post-episode 2, let alone episode 1. I mean, in episode 8, we see her freaking out that N might be dead, but yet she was 100% ready to tear him apart in episode 1 without any thought in the world. And retroactively, they'll just send a backup. Sin will send a backup. But then she actively pursues against Sin's wishes at multiple times while thinking she's around Sin, which is stated in episode 4.
New body, same horrors, huh, Sin?
Again in 6.
Anything to screw Sin's plan.
Unknowingly, directly to Sin. And again in 8.
Working with Sin!
Do your job and I leave you and N alone. Right, V?
So while the pilot is really, really interesting, and narratively as a premise is one of my favorite episodes still, dissecting it overall, there's a lot of narrative plot holes that were later built into the series and then had to be patched later on, which is completely okay. This is where I'm going to be the most pedantic. A lot of stuff isn't given back to the viewer. If you're a lore buff, you're about to agree with me with a lot of things. But episode 1, narratively, retrospectively, kind of, it shows its age, it shows its writing potential for a very different story that was obviously changed later, maybe as a B plot. But the narrative A plot was established very early on. I mean, we see glimpses of the Absolute Solver erupting in Uzi, various stages throughout the episode, and I think that's incredible visual storytelling, which I think the show does phenomenal at. There are a lot of things that you can pause the show and look in the background and see something that could be reasonably applied to a speculative, theory about where the story is going, and it could reasonably fit. And that's also something I'll continue to bring up, because a lot of the stuff in the background can make theories go one way or another no matter how you spin it. Something that isn't really fully explained either is we know Doll gets her powers in episode 1. That's presumably when she watches her parents die, because the disassembly drones state they've been trying to get the outpost doors open for months.
I've been trying to get past those doors for months. Nice work, Ann.
So without any other evidence of them ever being inside the colony, and Uzi and most of the kids never ever seeing a disassembly drone in their lives.
What have our parents done for the past forever while those things build a spire of corpses? hide under the ice behind 3 stupid doors?
We can assume episode 1 is the only time that they've ever been in the colony causing chaos. Therefore, Doll gets her powers very shortly before Uzi does, because hers begin to activate with her fight with Jay. So it just knowing that Yeva was a cabin fever drone, but 1, didn't fight back against V, and 2, presumably was so traumatized based on a lot of the flashback pictures we see of her, didn't teach Doll about this power she probably inherited. I think it was a plot point to have Doll be this much more like mirror to Uzi, this emotionally stable version of Uzi in the earlier series, and hence the reason why she gets a much stronger sense of control over her absolute solver beforehand, because there's a lot of evidence suggesting that the absolute solver can go a little haywire if you're emotionally distressed, but if you remain emotionally stable, you have a greater control over it, hence why Uzi is able to fight back against Sin, who we can extrapolate has potentially 20 plus years of experience with the absolute solver. And this is implied because episode 3, we see the posters that say Uzi's classmates are 19 and 20, so we can assume that Uzi is as well 19 or 20. And if we take what she said during her presentation to heart, that the children have never seen any disassembly drones, and maybe the parents have, there's been at least a 20-year gap in between the Elliot Gala massacre, the end of humanity, and the eventual invasion of Copper 9, ignoring potential space travel time or what have you. On a less somber note though, a few things that the pilot does really well on the narrative side of things is that it very quickly, without wasting a lot of time, establishes the world that you're getting into, the way that the workers are, and especially the way that they treat Uzi. Very early on, you're very well acquainted that Uzi is this emotional and physical outcast. She's shorter than the rest. She's very emotionally different than the rest. She's got very different ways of approaching situations compared to her peers. Not strictly because of her being goth and her interest in the occult, but that even in a situation where you would have multiple types of people, you know, in a school setting, she is still ostracized. Also extremely intelligent compared to the very dumbed down and nihilistic personality of her peers. And so this very much mirrors that a divide between Uzi and Doll, even though Doll was at this point not a character and probably wasn't even considered to be a character. And we see, even if the story was reused from itself, the 3 drop pods at the end of the episode, and eventually the hexagonal virus put on N being shown in the episode 5 flashback, whether that was intentional or just because the showrunner knew what they had put in the pilot and then called back to it in later scenes, are some narrative highlights that can be taken at face value as being done fairly well, or well enough considering the circumstance they were in. As a whole, now, episode 1 unfortunately does not hold up, but it is still an absolute joyride nonetheless.
What are you things? Better to stay distant, though, don't you think?
Now, moving on. Episode 2. Where to begin with this? Episode 2 kind of falls into the same category as episode 1, where I consider it a part of the Twilight Zone, where the plot from the pilot still really hasn't fully developed, but the main plot line, which has been fully established, is still up in the works. I think episode 3 is where the plot line starts to take a grasp on itself and become episodic. But here in Heartbeat, we're still very much not sure what we want to do, especially since this episode takes place after the long hiatus in between the pilot, and like what was said for Murder Drones,
I don't super remember, honestly, the original episode 2 premise.
You wrote the whole script for it.
Yeah.
You wrote the whole thing.
It was a zombie invasion?
Yeah, and then you picked up the script and you're like, nah, I don't want it. And you just threw it out. You worked on that for so long, you just burnt the script. You're like, Jane, we're turning Jane to an eldritch monster instead. The old Liam switcheroo.
Oh, very
Ink asks, how long can the murder drones last without oil?
Ooh, good question.
Oh, that plot thread we definitely didn't drop.
Wait, real quick before we answer this, just the whole oil thing that we did set up in the pilot, that was going to be like a massive sort of plot thread throughout the season.
Yes.
We sort of like we were setting up the murder drones ultimately to be vampires, right? And that was the whole lust for oil thing that set up, and then we sort of took a complete right turn from that plot thread.
I think it.
The old Liam switcheroo.
They had no idea that it was going to turn into an eldritch horror. So, speaking on that matter, I'm going to start with my favorite thing first. The codename Centipede, because narratively it very much stands out as a problem in the grand scheme of things, because I think it shows the greatest wear and tear on what the story originally was going to be about. Specifically, when the Absolute Solver, using Eldritch J as a centipede, going around consuming worker drones multiple times. In the final scene, when Uzi and Anna are confronting Eldritch J, it speaks and refers to itself as plural, we, instead of I.
We're busy then anyway. We are trying to repair that host. You are our cute puppets. It hurts our feelings you don't remember us.
Which is something that kind of just goes away and never gets addressed.
Perhaps you'd like to attend the gala with me. You will not have to discard your pets, and I will not discard you. Honestly, I'm starving.
They really made it seem like the Absolute Solver was going to be like this eldritch hive mind, and then it eventually swapped over to Sin being very independent as an entity with powers rather than a collective consciousness, which is something that I want to bring up again later. So, what do we know about the centipede in lore? Apparently, when a disassembly drone under admin controls of Sin is severely damaged enough where their auto-run repair program, the Absolute Solver, does not have enough material, it will have remote access, presumably by Sin, to be turned into a centipede. And I think it was probably a good idea that they kind of moved away from this just being a thing that could happen at any time. Because it's kind of overpowered, if you think about it. I mean, especially with the understanding of what happened in episode 6. There should be way more of those things running around under, Ring 1 connection with Sin. And it doesn't hold up as a plot point. It was a really fun concept, and it's by far one of my most favorite designs ever perceived in this show. But if it was allowed to flourish, it doesn't make sense, because why would it need to collect matter when we see that Jay was already on the ship with Sinessa at the end of the pilot? So a backup was already functioning with current Jay's memories. So the need for matter collection is irrelevant. The need for repairs is irrelevant because the backup J was already functioning. I don't think that was established at the time, of course. Like I said, episode 3 is when I think the lore starts to become a lot more concrete and it gets the identity that you want to focus on. But it's a shame that an episode officially considered a part of the canon, which the pilot kind of is as well, is just narratively lacking, and they don't really address any of the glaring holes left behind. Otherwise, it's still a very interesting episode. I mean, we have this understanding that worker drone society is very nihilistic. They don't really worry about death until it's knocking on their door. They have a very simple way of thinking. Even adults seem to have the moral complexities of paranoid high school students. But episode 2 on its own, understandably, is not the commercial success that episode 1 or episode 3 is, but it definitely was the start of the narrative establishment of the show, of it being a horror action comedy. They definitely amped up the animation quality as well, going from the mocap of episode 1 to the standard 3D animation of episode 2. Before we move on to episode 3, the one where I think I can narratively gush about rather than dissect with less than zeal, is the fact that we see in episode 8, when Sin is defeated, her core leaves behind a black hole, presumably the soul of the Absolute Solver. But we see this in every single Solver core. When Dahl teleports, a black hole appears. When various parts of Eldritch J are destroyed, black holes spawn, and they never get addressed. I think that was meant to have story implications later down the line, if we know for sure that scary robot skin suit was a narrative absolute. From about the start of the release of the season, we can reasonably and theoretically ascertain that Sin's defeat at episode 8 was not originally planned. It was meant to have a more dark eldritch connotation, that you kill one host and there's still so many more, not only here on Copper 9 but throughout the galaxy, and that the death of this god is not its final death. And that's one thing I will give episode 2 credit on. A very, very simple thing. It reveals a lot of what the show could have been. So while the story that the pilot presented is extremely deviated upon, and episode 2 doesn't really have a strong grasp on where it wants to be yet in its own world building, it's still a fun ride, and for what it's worth, it offers a lot of subtle insights on what the story could have been going down this Eldritch route if we did get the longer season that was initially planned. But overall, I would have to put narratively Heartbeat on a lower tier than the pilot, since it kind of just has a lot of things that are established and then never further upon or actively retconned, like V mentioning that.
Or you missed the negotiations. The humans programmed us to solve a problem. Where's proof of your backstory? The one where you're kind so conveniently innocent.
But we know for a fact retroactively that she has her memories intact, so why would she feel the need to perpetuate the lie that she's working for humanity instead of just spouting something about doing her job or, working with Jay? It just seems like they very much still had the idea that JC Jensen and humanity was going to be an active plot point for a while there, and that the disassembly drones would have a connection to humanity. Also, that the disassembly drones probably have lungs, because V can blow bubbles. You need something to pass through the bubble to make bubbles. So really love that they have heart-shaped cores and that the disassembly drones probably in some capacity have lungs. That's a fun lore drop.
This is an unrelated layoff! Fuck! Good!
Some extra notes to be taken down is that while I say these things, we also have the season 1 trailer which shows us visuals at least up to episode 5. So while it could be seen that Liam doesn't fully have the plot down, at the very least we know for a fact the plot was being established, and that while stuff was done sort of backwards, we were 100% in the Eldritch plotline. V is 100% conscious of all the events that have gone on, and any mixed matched voice lines are just remnants of them trying to restructure the plot to fit this new narrative more coherently and correctly, and hence why most likely a lot of stuff was changed around the episode 6 period, hence the longer production times, as they definitely needed to streamline the lore so that it could be easily digestible in individual and binge watches. Another thing that kind of goes woefully under the radar with episode 2 is the fact that we kind of get a tease here of what I believe was the previous plot of Murder Drones. We have this whole plot with episode 2 that Eldritch J is going around the outpost, murdering people and using holograms to manipulate drones into falling into death traps. We kind of see that the Absolute Solver program needs to look at a drone at the very least for it to be acknowledged and then replicated in hologram, as seen when it looks at Lizzie and then replicates her, or it takes Thad but doesn't kill him and is able to make a hologram of him. It makes you think that because it showed baby Uzi and Nori, which we know now Uzi was 100% born post-core collapse, and we know that Sin was originally patched out of Nori prior to the official implosion of the planet. That I think this is an early rendition, just like how there was early concept art of Khan being a much more villainously antagonistic father. I believe Nori was meant to be much more villainous than she eventually turned out to be that we saw in episode 7 and 8. I also believe that this is kind of furthered by a few things that Alice says in episode 6 that I will double back to once we get to that point. And this may be a throwaway, but I think in episode 2, Thad mentions recent disappearances, but the Eldritch monstrosity had just been released as we've seen that episode. So unless there's a time skip in between when we see Eldritch J kill Frank and when Thad gets the railgun, which isn't the case because he even states he saw Jay's body crawl away.
Recent disappearances? And your murder friend's corpse? When I went to grab your gun, it kinda looked like it crawled away?
Even by episode 2, Dahl is beginning to enter a very sociopathic state of mind and killing worker drones to feast upon their oil to satiate the Solver's desires. Alright, this is where the dire attitude starts to go away. We all know Murder Drone's story isn't perfect, but episode 3 is where things start to get better. I feel like they start planting their feet in the soil of how the story is going to get where it needs to go. This is the start of where the main plot sets course. So, because I want to leave this on a high note as I enter into episode 4, 5, and so on, let's start with the bad. Yeva. We know Yeva was successfully patched. We saw it in episode 7. So Yeva dying to V after the disassembly drones got into the outposts in the pilot makes no sense. You're telling me this experimental solver drone that has complete autonomy over her own body would just be 100% okay with letting herself and her husband and potentially her daughter die to V? I mean, as much as we want to try to articulate the idea that the disassembly drone's main autonomous purpose was to destroy rogue solver units so that Sin could consume planets uncontested, no, they can't. We see from Uzi, Nori, and Sin, and Dahl, this is near godlike powers. Disassembly drones may have quite literally every tool and weapon imaginable, but if the absolute solver can just casually redirect bullets without the user directly involving themselves in the force field process, you've got a nearly unkillable drone by conventional means, and Yeva having the solver doesn't make sense when you look back at the promenade. Now, to get to the good stuff. Other than the fact that it didn't need to be a prom, that's aesthetically pleasing. The music's bumpin'. AJ DiSpirito killed it with the knife dance, and the prom soundtrack, I mean, just goes great.
Quit saving me!
Story-wise, though, it's really good. We get the ball rolling. We've established that V knows more than she's letting on. That ends grappling with the fact that he doesn't know exactly what he is and what the disassembly drones are meant to do, and this is the start of his character development towards being a more autonomous individual, despite the fact that he clings to Uzi like a lost puppy most often. This is the first push towards him having an actual personality other than, I'm with Uzi. We also get a lot of background knowledge into the Absolute Solver through visual storytelling. We see, for whatever reason, in episode 2 it doesn't like mirrors, and that's followed up in episode 3 when Uzi's changing in the restroom and she sees all the broken mirrors covered in the goopy absolute solver fleshy blood stuff. It's the first nail on the head that you kind of know, okay, this thing is affecting Doll before you see it explicitly, because you don't know what is the absolute solver and what isn't yet, because we've only seen Eldritch J at this point, and if you've got a keen eye, Uzi blocking a bullet in the pilot. So we see what this thing really is. We've got that foot in that dark horror aspect that we got from episode 2, and we're going to continue going off that way. Doll's affected by it, she gets some eldritch powers by it, and she's out for revenge. And I think it's a great bit of creative storytelling when you look at the fact that N and Uzi were 100% going to get together, because purple and yellow are complementary colors, and Doll has the red, which is around the same spectrum as purple. So they're both the same and opposite colors, which is very ironic because that's what they are. Doll is the antithesis to Uzi, I kept to myself, that I stayed being a loner, I didn't branch out, I didn't accept that I needed help. Which starts Uzi's growth in this episode, as well as she accepts that she needs the disassembly drones, that these people are her friends, that they're actually good people deep down, and that she can't go about this alone. This is where I think a lot of things start being put in place towards the greater narrative, and it does it really, really, really well. There's also a few other lingering pieces of lore that can kind of be speculated on that don't have full answers, like how the Absolute Solver program is a TRN file. It's a server backup log, something a computer would send a callback ping towards in a need for a default reboot, which is really funny because it makes it seem like, especially with episode 2, and this eventually kind of gets fuzzy later on, it really adds to the theory that these things are backups of sin, because that's the dominant personality that kind of shines through in things that default to the administrator. It's always an interesting thought when you see the administrator as sin and never the absolute solver. It's sin. The absolute solver is the program, but the administrator, the callback ping, the user, is always sin. And that's first teased here in this episode, and it took us 2 years before we finally got the payoff about that. Episode 3 doesn't exactly explain how Lizzie and V ever made time to hang out either. I mean, for the most part, V's locked up in the drop pod, and the series takes place almost every episode being at most, except the jump from 3 to 4 not really being fully explained, usually about 24 hours or immediately after each other. So it just doesn't make sense, because Lizzie's either with Doll or V's with N in the drop pod while he's sulking. The only few times that we can extrapolate that Lizzie and V hung out was when N was looking for the dapper suits for them and Doll was murdering people. But other than that, it seems like they had like a very tight-knit relationship for how little time they could actually have been hanging out with each other. While entirely unintentional, because we know from the end of episode 8 that Liam forgot about the hero's journey literary structure, it's ironic because here in episode 3, when the narrative kind of like plants itself, is also both the call to action and the rising action in the series. It kind of immediately jumps into the formula, obviously because it's lagging behind by having an identity crisis in between the pilot. But it's a cute bit of trivia that it perfectly encapsulates where it is in the story and then will eventually crescendo later on. Overall, this is really the start of the narrative ups that Murder Drones has. It's nothing to write home about, but it does perfectly splice that line of being just very creatively interesting, really appealing to the eyes and to the ears. Music's great, setting's great, really just everyone looks adorable. V's dress and suit, everyone in their prom outfits. It's unfortunate that we'll eventually lose touch with our supporting cast of characters here on out, and they were originally supposed to be canned. We know from GlitchX 2023 that Lizzie, Thad, and Khan were very much not supposed to come back in episode 7 and 8, and that was obviously a later rewrite.
what happened to Thad? You see him in
Yeah, where's Thad?
Where's Thad?
Yeah,
You see
where'd
him
he
in,
go?
Episode 2 and 3. He just disappeared from the show.
He was all the fans, Liam.
It was too powerful. Yeah, I think he was a character, I think, from kind of an earlier inception of kind of the show's premise. I think season 1, I think show's still kind of finding what it is, like its tone, where we're spending most of our time. And I think Thad was very much like, if it was more of a kind of slice of life, kind of like truly monster of the week type thing, he would be a character there. It kind of turns out we pretty quickly, the character, like the stakes in the characters kind of outgrew kind of just going to school. It's a little hard to justify that when there's crazy insane eldritch stuff happening. So it's like, all right, Dad, you stay in school, be a good child, we'll come back to you later.
But these little bits and pieces that we get of them that build up on their characters, especially Cons, surprisingly has the most character development out of the supporting cast. In episode 3 starts his journey of becoming a better father. He's listening to the advice that he got in episode 2 from the teacher during the parent-teacher conference. He's actively applying himself, and while he's still very much a coward, he's finally starting to see the growth in Uzi and understanding that he himself needs to grow. While Lizzie and Thad are going to be stagnant characters for the rest of when we see them, they're still really fun to be around. Lizzie's your obvious popular girl, Thad's your obvious popular guy, and they fill a supporting cast role really well. They're interesting and fun to have on the screen, but they're not adding to the greater storyline, and that's okay. This is also where we get the introduction to Tessa, which we'll later learn is Sinessa, that there are a lot more disassembly drones than we realize. We find out that Jay was already reconstituted once again on the drop pod that Tessa was in, which means Eldritch J was entirely unnecessary to repair Jay, but adds to the credence of it being a Sin backup, hence why it took on this centipedal form. And as much as the tease of Tessa is ultimately a nothing burger, looking back at the time, it was very much an interesting thing to get. Oh, here's the humanist approach. And I'll tackle that later on, because unfortunately I believe it is the narrative flopping. It was very much appealing at the time. And looking back, this moment still cements itself as pretty good because it does a great bit of foreshadowing, because you realize that the thematic motif that plays is not Tessa's theme, it's Sin's.
Oh, not sure we're invited, little buddy. Why not just hang with me?
The gala, the orchestra, the piano, it's not the motif that follows Tessa and the Elliots, it's Sin's. And I really like that because we were teased about what we were going to get very early on, and then teased almost explicitly in episode 5, but at the time of 5's release, we didn't have enough information to ascertain what we were really being fed. So I think this also being the start of the eventual Sinessa review and the start of the Absolute Solver plotline with Uzi is why ultimately episode 3 is one of the most popular episodes, save for the pilot, because it finally gets the ball rolling on what Murder Drone Story is and what it wants to be.
Please, don't hurt me!
Alright, let's start by getting people angry. I'm about to say it. Episode 4 is better than episode 3. There, I said it. Alright, now I'm gonna tell you exactly why. So, we've established a few kinks from episode 3, but that this is where the story really starts to begin. Episode 4 is where things are laid in foundation. The story really starts at the end credits of episode 3, and it's just picked up from here. I believe Cabin Fever is better than The Promenade because it pays off everything that starts being set up in episode 3 and furthers the story to the reveal that we get in episode 7 and then the finale. A few things I want to point out. I just want to get the baggage off. This is where a few of the story's retcons both come into play, but also can be kind of explained. Right? 1, we see in episode 3 that Uzi's classmates are around age 18 to 20. So they are considered adults, but they're still in child roles. We all know that there was a bit of a shipping war that happened around this time. That was probably one of the reasons why that was included in the prompting. But it almost feels like they went back on that when N says,
"She's a kid, like us, V! What is wrong with you?"
And then you just put that into perspective with the fact that they're playing camp counselor, an adult role, and it's a little strange. You don't really look into it. It's a bunch of fictitious robots, but it's just something that when you're re-watching it back to back, you might be like, okay, that's a little strange. Also, the one story-wise failing that doesn't really have an explanation. I mean, there's even stuff in episode 2 and 3 that kind of get retroactively fixed, kind of, even if it doesn't fully make sense. The one where V says,
"New body, same horrors, huh, Sin?"
After just previously a few minutes prior telling N that,
V, we can't hurt Uzi!
Do our jobs, and that thing leaves us alone.
Don't know what you're talking.
Well, we know from episode 8 that thing is Sin. Their job is to get rid of rogue solver units that pose a threat to Sin, which I am happy to get into extraordinarily detail for the next episode. But we'll start here, where things start getting paid off in 4. That's just the one thing that can't be explained, because we know that Sin has a backup remote access into anything infected with some strain of the Absolute Solver, which includes the disassembly drones, which would mean that Sin would, if it was Sin, which it wasn't, Sin would have just straight up heard V be like, "Hey boss, I'm rebelling against you," which would make no sense why we need to do our jobs and it leaves us alone. When you're actively under the assumption that we do our jobs, that thing leaves us alone, and that job was to murder everything on Copper 9 so that you and N can live a happy life without Sin needing to barge in. So it's just, well, doesn't make sense. They never go back and explain it. V just states an act of rebellion. But this is the first episode that really establishes that to some degree the Absolute Solver and Sin might still be separate entities. I'll get into that at a later section. But the narrative really starts getting paid off here. I believe 8 minutes, 43 seconds, we see a glimpse of Sinessa, so Sin, wearing Tessa's skin. We also know at the end of episode 5, start of episode 6, that Tessa and Jay made a deal with Doll, and Doll is here ghosting Uzi throughout the episode, and N. As well as Sinessa's doing the same thing. Not so sure to how much of Doll's knowledge, but it actually goes into episode 5, which took me rewatching it to realize, because most people don't get how you jump from 4 to 5. But the really important scene is when N is searching for Uzi and he goes into the cabin and he finds the zombie drones tape. He's being ghosted both by Doll and Sin. You see Sin's human hands up on the rafters while Doll is ghosting directly behind him. And it's when he touches the J.C. Jensen zombie drones tape that he starts getting flashbacks of the manor, the Elliott Manor, and the Gala Massacre. And I think that 100% leads into the establishment of episode 5, why we start out in a flashback. Because Sin actively sees that N, one of her units, is regaining memories he's not supposed to have because it will damage her plans that she's currently enacting while on Copper 9. Another plot point, which I think further establishes that the Absolute Solver is a separate entity compared to its users. Whenever Uzi is in great emotional distress, when her fight or flight responses are flaring out of control, or when she's just not in a state of full control of herself, if you look at her emotionally like a human being, is when the Absolute Solver program starts to take hold. At various times we see it flash yellow, which is obviously what we thought to be Sin's influence, but as I'll bring up in the episode 5 narrative, it's the Absolute Solver. Yellow isn't Sin's color. Yellow's the Absolute Solver's. And while Sin is the presumable master of that, she's just jacking into something. She's using it. It's not her. Because we see Uzi has not really formed her bond with the Absolute Solver the same way that, say, Doll has or Sin has. She doesn't have a lot of control, especially since she's very emotional. She has no idea what's been going on these past 3 episodes. She's already been outcasted and othered by her family, her friends, her own people, and she's just now starting to build a kinship with this arguably other species of drone that are already integrating into her society better than she ever did. She's She's alone. She's afraid. She doesn't want to be left behind. She doesn't want this depressive darkness to control her. But that's exactly what it does. And it allows the solver to like prop up her negative emotions. Like how Sin gets the manipulative messages, Uzi gets hers. I'm jealous of the disassembly drones. I'm jealous of the other worker drones. Why do they get to be happy? Why do they, have their happily ever after? Why do they get to fit in? Why am I outcasted? Why am I alone? What's going on with me? Where am I? What's going on? And we see her go solve her. She gets the flesh wings, she gets the tail, but it's in her color, it's in purple, and she's conscious of it.
Not like you killed anyone.
Oh, no, I definitely...
Kidding! Just avoid another whole spot.
It's not like when Sin takes over in later episodes and she doesn't remember what was going on. She's conscious. She knew she killed a bunch of people because the solver was playing its same manipulative tricks on Uzi. That wasn't Sin. It was the absolute solver running that on her. And every time we see Uzi in that sense of great emotional or physical distress is when the solver takes a lot more control over her, and it's when Sin has the best back-end access to Uzi to take control. And we see Uzi later on in episode 8 do this exact same thing to reject Sin. Sin is 100% making moves starting in episode 4. And I think this also pays off for what we see with episode 8, with Sin being very, full of herself. She's going around fighting, believing that she's on top of the world. And I think that's exactly what the solver does. It gives a drone these powers, and it makes him feel like God. Uzi has an essay. It all says, I am God, I am God, I am God, I am God. What does Sin say?
The solver of the absolute fabric, the void, the exponential end.
It's hubris. Even Uzi plays with her food when she's fighting V in this episode. She's still conscious and in semi-control of herself because she snaps herself out once she hurts N. But she knows. She's angry. She's angry at V, and she's tossing her around. She's stabbing her with her own swords, not finishing her off right away like she easily could. When you have a god complex, when you're a narcissist, when you think you're on top of the world, you think you can't be stopped. So might as well have a little fun. I think that's exactly what the solver does to people. And that's established here very early on, very much before we see Sin's defeat. A lot of tie-ins to 5, 6, 7, and 8, even before they were out. And of course, when Uzi looks at the files from the drone in the floor, there's the Sentinel tease. We see that there's a new type of unit, TSA-, and I'm going to get into that has a raptor tooth in it. So even before episode 5 came out, they knew what they wanted for episode 6, robot dinosaurs. And overall, I think the narrative really starts to focus itself up. And I think it does the balance between the obviously Friday the 13th, comedy routine on top of the many narrative lore drops really, really well. Episode 3 started it, and I think episode 4 is even better, where the show really starts to get its identity, where the backgrounds are telling you a story that you won't understand until the story is finished. And while that can have its ups and downs as a storytelling mechanism, I think it's really good. And this is where I can really start, applying praises to how the series handles its story once Liam, got his shit together and started focusing on the story. Overall, episode 4 is a really, really enjoyable time. And after rewatching it now, I can appreciate it a lot more than I could have at first. Because I used to just think, oh, it has Solver Uzi, one of the best soundtracks of the series. And, 98.7 and camping.mp3 were just...
To the bunks!
Really relaxing soundtracks, but now I can look back and really appreciate what this episode offered us. We also know from GlitchX, it was here in the camping episode where officially the disassembly drones needing oil to survive plot point was officially dropped. Also where initially the supporting cast of Khan, Lizzie, and Thad were also supposed to be dropped after this episode.
Thad has had his ups and downs in terms of being part of the story, and I am regretful, our poor beautiful boy. but if it makes you feel better, he just gets to hang out. He doesn't have to deal with the horrors of the world, so he gets to play sports and things.
Ink asks, how long can the murder drones last without oil? Ooh.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I think so one, there's the practicality of, again, just kind of the power scaling of all right, are these guys who like kind of want to eat one person occasionally? Do those really start stacking up to the villains who are getting more and more kooky, crazy bananas? And then the other side of it is just like, just like if what the plot focuses on, because it's like that is an area that is probably still a struggle, and there are probably like dilemmas to focus on there, and that could have been the show. It doesn't mean it's not happening in the background. It's just not what we're seeing. So it's totally. That's my way to justify how we moved away from that in terms of what we're showing the audience, because in terms of like importance to kind of where I want the story to go.
And that allows me to further a potential theory that I might want to get into, because we see this emotional distress that causes the solver to ramp up in the worker drone unit, those infected by it. One of the most emotionally distressful things that can happen to you, that can cause your fight or flight response to activate, is dying. We know that they don't need oil, the disassembly drones don't, and there's a reason that the solver affected units take on almost a disassembly drone visage with the bat wings and the tails. I don't want to get too much into it, but I think the absolute solver puts drones in a high temperature state of fight or flight response to cause them to become extremely duressed and grasping for straws, trying to find an out. And so it forces them to do something that they're very uncomfortable with, forces them to tap into this thing in a desperate attempt to preserve themselves. It's also why V is obviously shaken up by the end of episode 2, and we see her toy with Uzi at various times during episode 4, because she knows it's going to happen eventually. She just needs Uzi to unravel this mystery, and knows at the same time it would hurt N. But what she didn't expect is that, she would start to trust them. She would start to trust Uzi in this episode. This episode does really well because it separates all the drones, for the most part, and allows their characters to flourish. N starts growing more independent. He starts growing up. He starts understanding that he isn't just a doormat when he's separated from Uzi. Uzi shows a lot of her angsty teen persona is just a persona, and that she's just scared and frightened and is looking for support. And V is obviously extremely conflicted, doesn't know what to do, has accepted that these worker drones don't need to die, thinks Uzi needs to die, but knows that she needs her and that she loves N too much to break his heart. And so it creates the trifecta of the full beginning of their character development. We got the snippets in episode 3 with them all smiling at each other and saying, we need to start working together.
I'm done dealing with everything alone. We move forward together or not at all.
But here, all of them separated, and now their personalities are starting to shine. And while I wish there was a lot more interaction between V and Uzi before this episode, this is the episode that adds a lot of depth to their character, and I think really takes them out of their tropes and establishes them as independent characters. This is the episode that really shows that a lot of the story was done retroactively. Liam 100% did not have his faculties fully straight when he started the series, but when he established the plotline of the Absolute Solver and the reveal of Sinessa, things started being put into place. Episode 3 starts that, episode 4 starts paying that off. It's very well planned out, and that's why the episodes start getting narratively more focused. The episodes in their episodic format start to make sense. A lot of those really cool key details that you can notice applies to that is Uzi breaks open a chunk of a cabin's floor and reveals a cabin fever drone. It's surrounded by the same pictures of premonitions that her mother used to get. Pictures of the disassembly drones, of Sin, of the Absolute Solver. And it shows that anything that can kind of ping into the Absolute Solver almost share not a hive mind, which we thought from episode 2, but more of a cloud storage, like a Google Drive, that if you have the Absolute Solver in you, you can go into that drive and see the data. And thus, these drones are getting premonitions of an invasion, sky demons, a monster. And it's because they're directly jacking into the save files of Sin. They know what's coming because they're looking at things through her eyes, just like she can do to them. Hence why in episode 2, we see Nori holding baby Uzi and speaking in Sin's voice says,
"It hurts our feelings you don't remember us."
Because Sin's been watching. And that's another thing that's later paid off in episode 7 when Sinessa states that her feed kept getting cut off. I'm about to have a lot of fun. You have no idea. Episode 5 is nigh objectively one of, if not the best episodes in the series. Cope, Mauled, and Seethe. Alright, let's get into this, because I have a lot to talk about. Get ready for the yap session. Alright, I'm going to start where the episode starts. Call back to episode 1. Hexagons are the bestagons, and they run Worker Drone Operating System 606. The error that, coincidentally, when they don't have their operating systems, which is also when a self-reboot can occur if they are not physically destroyed, is when the Absolute Solver can mutate within them, and they blink neon yellow. Now, to deconstruct a lot of what we see in the tape, we see Sin's model, the CYN dash letters and numbers, are all a part of a worker drone model 1001. And this tape mentions how 0.01% of improperly disposed drones of worker model 1001, which all of the drones on Copper 9, as well as in the Corpse Spire and the ones around the Elliott Manor are of this model, have a 0.07% chance of rebooting if they are improperly discarded. So not only are all the drones that presumably were mass-produced across the multitude of the human colonies, WD-1001, but that means that they all could potentially become hosts of the Absolute Solver. We see snippets from the training video that also show on top of the hexagon that Jay used in the first episode is an OS destruction string. We also see disassembly plant parts. You know, when they go through the machine that disassembles the formerly active worker drone, has appendages that are eerily similar to the disassembly drones, which pays credence to that Sin was able to mechanize her machines using parts made from drone disassembly plants, which allows the double meaning of their armband marked for disassembly, which was initially used by humans to mark a drone to be disassembled, now marked a disassembly drone for that purpose, to disassemble. To talk about a few more speculative things, because of what we know from the Liam Vickers Q&A in his server, we know that Tessa was originally supposed to be very drone-centric, even more so than we initially see. She wasn't just supposed to be this breath of fresh air, she was also supposed to be very, ostracized from humanity and very drone-focused. Because in the actual episode, since they couldn't fit that in, we see that she almost treats her drones like toys, which is what Sin directly tells her as well.
You will not have to discard your pets, and I will not discard you.
She doesn't treat them so much like people in this episode, and this is the biggest glimpse into what we know happened on Earth, and is one of the most interesting ones at that. It could be one of the reasons why Sin eventually ends up betraying Tessa and, evidently wearing her skin. But, N is very much treated like a toy when Tessa sees him. And I think that is something that, while being locked in a basement, forced to scribble down math code and experiment on broken down drones, you see and you don't really look favorably upon. Speaking of seeing things favorably, I think I finally ascertained the reasons why people really dislike this episode. It is extremely narrative focused. There's a lot more tension that's held for a long period of time before the joke breaks the tension, which we know is Liam Vickers' style, but it's held a lot longer. And I think you couple that onto, if you don't look back at the series retrospectively, it just feels like you were tossed into a flashback, and now it's a narrative lore dump with not a lot of the usual style. It breaks the niche that has kind of been established, but it's where I get really, really invested. I am a lore buff, I am a narrative freak, and this episode really sings that symphony to my heart. So we established in the previous section that Sin sees N pick up the zombie drones tape, which allows him to remember things of now. And that's most likely the reason why him and V went comatose. The Absolute Solver, our dearest Sin, is now hacking into them with the attempts to destroy those memories because they pose one huge threat. Sin is on planet, and if they get all of their memories back and they know what happened on Earth, they will know two big things. Tessa's dead, and that there's some spooky stuff going down in a certain laboratory that can stop this madness. And considering that Sin is currently on planet and still has some semblance of access to her drones at this moment, this is where the divergence of storytelling especially happens. because we're looking at a battle between Uzi and Sin through the lens of a flashback. We see that the things are happening in this flashback with N, V, J, Sin, and Uzi are not entirely connected to what really happened at the Elliott Mansion Gala massacre. It's almost like they're avatars playing out their own memories, and so there's some influence the present day people, drones, can affect to these memories. That's why N is able to see his own corpse. So while you may think, oh man, we're going back into these memories, but we're not getting a whole lot of N interacting with Tessa and J. We're not seeing more about V, who is unfortunately missing a lot of narrative storytelling to her character since we just got tidbits in 4. But it's because the perspective is actually the absolute solver Sin and Uzi. Those are the two main factors here, and they're battling each other in this, I'm trying to restore these memory files, the other one's trying to at first continue to suppress them, but eventually goes to just destroying them. Can't have my cosplay as my former master, go to waste. And this is where I'm going to get into speculative theory. Just a little bit, not into full detail. We know from episode 6 that there is a picture of post-Gala massacre Tessa still being alive. After knowing episode 7, what happens in that episode, we're initially presumed to think Tessa died at the Gala massacre. Well, without going too much into detail, without, sticking to too much speculative theory because we have a lot to go over, I think the reason that she got skinned and turned into a cosplay for Sin was because she survived the Gala massacre. She was allowed to not discard her pets. She just watched a ton of people die, and that it was enacted by her former friends, that she spent a lot of time repairing and trying to give a second chance at life. She saw the one people that treated her like she was something, since her parents, and especially humanity, treats her like a freak, just turn against her and start slaughtering people left and right. I think the reason why the Sentinels are serial designation TSA is because Tessa was the one that leaked the absolute solver to the scientists on Copper 9 and gave them the first initial schematics for drone sentinels, anti-drone sentinels. And because of that, they know, okay, we have to shore up our defenses against drones. And so there was a lot of biometric stuff, and we can assume that the reason Sin skinned Tessa was because Tessa would 100% not cooperate in galactic omnicide. So take her skin, her blood, her muscle, her eyes, her body, so I can pass the biometric scanners that are now in place. I think Tessa doomed herself. But of course, we never really get to see that because Uzi mentions if they pull out, they lose the rest of the memories.
So these are memories, and future me is dead at a sleepover?
Not a sleepover. You passed out because some internal program is trying to delete these memories. Kayan, I can pull you out at any time, but you'll never get these memories back, dude.
That are being tampered with, which is something that still happens at the end of the episode. While V still knows a lot more than N does, I think the general Gala massacre and its post-carnage all the way towards the end of Earth time were kind of wiped away for N, while V still has these snippets from her service to the absolute solver, to the destruction of Earth and the end of humanity, while we still don't have the full story because we're seeing N's memories and not V's. V is this unknowing avatar within her own story because she's comatose, same as N. And with this retrospective knowledge, episode 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 become very coherent. A lot of episode 5's teases give you the narrative beats that come into later episodes. So initially, they don't make a lot of sense. It's like, why is this happen? Why is this going on? What? Why are we here? Why is that there? That doesn't make any sense. This is memories, but this is real. Onto that avatar thing. It also explains why Sin is in two places at once. Because we see the real Sin, the memory of Sin committing the Gala massacre. But in the basement is where the avatar of Sin hacking in to N and V that Uzi is in here trying to save is trying to delete their memories. And I think a big thing of why we kind of swap from Uzi's point of view, which is the memories with N and V, to Sin's POV, like in the bedroom, because N, V, and Uzi aren't there. Why are we seeing this? Because we're seeing it through the eyes of Sin. We're seeing it through her POV. She's looking at her memories. She has her avatar in the basement. Well, we're just dealing with broken memories. That's not too much. Just gotta stop the cosplay from being revealed. It's a bait and switch. Sin is purposely leading them to the basement. Sin's knocking on the basement door when Uzi says enter the spooky basement with the books. Sin wants them to go in there. Sin wants to lobotomize NNV. Sin wants to wipe these memories away. Sin doesn't want them to see what happened at the gala and what happens after. So she's baiting them into the basement. The whole story is a trick. And we see that Sin is really good at this because she's manipulating people from the very beginning. She did it from the very start because Sin was always in control. The Absolute Solver was just giving her a god complex that I talked about in the previous section. So with that going on, even if memories were restored, they don't know what's going on. Even the present ones don't know what happened at the gala, and so it leaves them wondering, and so they don't exactly know how the story's gonna go per se, which is why they're able to fall for Tessa and Jay's little trick. I also would really love to go further into that theory about Tessa because I think it explains a lot of Jay's character in episode 8 when you look at the story from a retrospective lens. Not to get too sidetracked though, but because of episode 8 and the end of 7, we know Sin's body was never destroyed and that she actively uses it. I think big points of how Uzi is able to channel herself into the crow and Sin into the solver centipede things in the basement. It's also the first time we see Sin's avatar meddling with the memories is in the tea lounge when N walks in just after leaving the library with the broken drones. We see Sin starting her manipulation tactics, getting him away from the basement, making Uzi want to get closer to the basement. It's like, hey, no, get to the spooky basement. Sin's playing a long game, she always has. She's used to it, she takes joy and pleasure in it, and it's explained very well, because there's a lot of background stuff, a lot of background details that explain this story, like through that lens of we're finally building up to it. And if you've watched the whole series, a lot of the Tetris pieces start falling into place. Another great big hit that the Absolute Solver is not in control, but it's individual users who are learning to master a power is Uzi's not obsessed with becoming like Tessa. She doesn't want to wear Tessa's bow. She doesn't want her long streams of hair. Sin wants that. Sin has this sick obsession with Tessa. She wants to be like her. She wants to wear her hair like her. She wants to be recognized and loved by the other drones like her. Wears her skin, steals her sword, takes her clothes, her luggage from her room. Everything that was Tessa's gets taken by Sin and brought to Copper 9 post skin suiting. It's not an Absolute Solver thing, or else Uzi would have started doing it. It's a Sin thing. And that furthers that the silly little goober is actually in full control, just with a god complex thanks to her new eldritch powers. And looking back on that, after having someone else explain that to me, really aligned a lot of the story together and was really pays credence to the fact that the skin suit Sinessa and the Uzi grappling with the Absolute Solver were the two main plot lines that Liam was like, I need to fix and I need to get this coherent. I already explained how Sin is actively in the memories, meddling with her own avatar like Uzi, hence why there's multiple N's, there's multiple V's, and there's multiple Sins, but only one Uzi, because their avatar is navigating those memories. And this episode also extremely well connects 3 and 4 together. While there's a lot of stuff that we don't see behind the scenes, we can assume that either Sin, Jay, and Doll went to Cabin Fever and realized they couldn't get in, which I assume is not the case due to the fact that Tessa falls for Alice's trap, but rather they know they need a key bug to get in. So Sin wants to find out, oh, if Uzi got the key bug, I gotta get myself that key bug. So Sin is currently actively trying to get in, wipe the memories from the drones, make sure they have a clean slate, and presumably also retake control since she's still the admin. It's the first moment that we see Uzi has the capacity to break the solver, to master its power, to get in control, is when Uzi hacks into Sin's avatar. The eldritch monster thing in the basement that Sin's using for her influence over the memories is then hacked into by Uzi, which we see again in episode 8 when Uzi is able to rebel. It's because Sin isn't the solver, Sin's using it. And so it's a skill that can be learned, and it's one that Uzi, this little tech whiz, is getting really good at really quickly and is posing a greater threat. So the moment that she's kicked out of her avatar, Sin realizes, uh-oh, I need this key bug, and I need to make sure these idiots don't get these memories back. So who does she decide to send in? Doll. We see Doll can teleport great distances very quickly, and if Sin is going to keep up this little masquerade of being Tessa, those drones can't figure out it's her. So she sends Doll in. Colin's like, oh hey, did you invite Doll to this sleepover?
Hey buddy, you invite Doll to this?
She breaks in, she starts fighting Uzi. Now, Sin's back in control, her avatar is under her control again, and Uzi's friends are in danger, and so she has to give up the key bug. It's an exceptionally smart play, and it's something that I really wish was communicated a lot more clear, especially about the stuff I just explained about them knowing that they need the key bug, and hence why sometime post episode 3, Doll met with Jay and Tessa and made a deal. At the end of this episode, she even mentions,
Вот ваш ключ. Берите меня с вами. Это условие.
We never see that deal, but looking back, it really makes sense. It's like, why is Doll showing up? We know why. Who's hacking into NNV right now? Well, it's Sin, and she's actually really close. So that remote connection is probably really strong, and she's been seeing through possibly NNV's eyes and knows, uh-oh, these people are starting to know a little too much, and I can't have that. I don't know exactly when the episode starts. We know it's after N sees the tape, so we don't know if him staring at it at the end of the bus ride in episode 4 is he touches it, he gains memories, and they go comatose. Presumably, they're not in their camping outfits. There's a time where they went back, and that's why you see the tape on the TV in Uzi's room, which is the most probable point of when the episode starts. As much as the cliffhanger was kind of stupid of them going, whoa, it ends off really, really closely connecting 3 and 4 together, and it makes episode 5 just this extremely coherent episode when you look back at the whole, because all of these details have been slowly drip fed throughout the later episodes, and looking back, I have a huge amount of appreciation for episode 5. I think it's exponentially one of the best episodes in the series. It is also the best episode that the fan project Intermission could have taken place in between, since the time skip in between episode 4 and 5 is the only time we don't have reasonable assumption of what events could have transpired in between each episode. On top of the fact that we see in the basement, Sin is working with numbers. She's crunching formulas and diagnostics. She's testing on broken drones. And we see a lot of interesting things. We not only see the solver tentacles, the crab arms, the hologram eyes. We also see what we could assume was Sin's first tail. She has a little skeleton dragon face that Uzi has. And we know from episode 8 she kept the flesh wings, but also has the tentacles, the spiked solver tentacles, and actively utilizes the hologram projections. I think on top of designing the initial designs for the disassembly drones, which we see a lot of failed creations, her still getting used to how the absolute solver's powers scale, function, manipulate, and the different shapes they take, what they can do, and how well to control them. She was learning her wizard powers down there in the basement, writing down formulas, crunching numbers, and finding parts to turn them from flesh abominations into an efficient fighting force that wasn't self-corrupting itself and breaking down. That's why you see the bodies of, well, the main trio as well as other manor drones being toyed with, and why so quickly things go belly up. The drones in the library kind of go and get corrupted. Because at this point, Sin hasn't fully perfected all of the disassembly drones, but is using the moment of the death of the humans to start the event. I need these flesh bags gone so I can get access to the disassembly plant and get the parts I need. The Gala massacre was the start of the end of planet Earth, the start of the Null Protocol and the consumption of the planet. And it gives me shivers that you can't really appreciate the fact that it's the end of the world, that this is someone's grand manipulation, that she's been toying with them for how long, that this defective drone isn't as defective as it's been playing itself up as, and it's a putting into motion a grand militarization of its magical powers, and is about to bring the end times for colony after colony of human planet. And what goes from the destruction of the human race and its colonies across the galaxy to now hunting down loose ends that have escaped. And that's the biggest plot point episode 5 establishes without telling you it's all background detail and it's all ascertained post episode 8. It really adds appreciation to the writing potential and style that Liam has. If he just sat down and created the story as a whole, even if it was retrospectively done, instead of starting from episode 1 and episode 8, now how do I get there from episode 1? We see it very much takes a episode 1, episode 8, how do I get to episode 8 from episode 1? It goes backwards. It's retrospectively fixed. And I think that's a really interesting writing style that can be done correctly, but is probably one of the reasons why Glitch wants you to have a rough draft of your season before pitching the pilot. Because Liam had a lot of great ideas. Liam is a great writer, has a great storytelling, strategy, but just kind of got lost in the sauce of doing what was cool. But ultimately, I think the climax of his writing style paying off and setting up the rest of the series climaxes with episode 5, and it is such an enjoyable watch to dissect now, realizing, oh shit, that's why this happens, or oh, this is that, or no, the reason why people don't like this episode is because they don't understand it. Like, you can't view it like this is a flashback. You have to view it of this is a battlefield between Sin and Uzi in someone else's memories. You realize, oh, they're in two places. Why are they in two places at once? Because there's avatars of the people actively participating in this memory flashback, in the flashback. And it's mind-blowing to go back and just really appreciate what this episode offered, how much it told you. It was like, yeah, Sin did make the disassembly drones. These aren't human creations. Yeah, V was probably afraid of this. She didn't want her memory wiped. She didn't want N potentially lobotomized, destroyed, had his operating system wiped out, and then eventually him replaced with another backup, which Sin states that she has.
Sin! If that little butler dies for your sake, I swear! I have backups.
That's my N. I don't want him gone. Vida Uzi in episode 2 try to get her off the trays. We see mechanical wings and flesh wings. We see the formulas. We see the experiments. We see Sin has been enacting this plan for a while and is finally putting it into motion. And all of that being laid down on the table, she's still manipulating us as the viewer in the present. She knows that this is dangerous, that her manipulations can be undone if this continues any further. So she bait and switches the main cast to go into a place where they will just see N's traumatic backstory and not what's happening, what she did, what's going on, and how it's going to affect Copper 9, which is just so expertly done. And I honestly don't think they retconned N in this. I think it's his coping strategy, because we're viewing the avatar of N through his current lens in the present day, which is coping with his trauma by going, oh, that's horrifying. Anyways.
Not dealing with this great, to be immediately honest. Okay, it's gone.
But then we see in episode 8 how much it really affects him when he thinks about what happened during his transformation into a disassembly drone. It's a coping strategy, and wasn't retconned to have trauma. He always had it. His coping strategy just didn't work when his little sister was hunting them down in a long hallway, and he realized that little drone he thought he loved was actually a sick, twisted monster that manipulated drones and humanity for their ultimate end. Oh, this episode is so good. Oh, if Yagsterr watches this, I hope you listened well. Episode 5 is a spectacular time, and it really leads into the reveals of episode 7, and consequently episode 6. It is the climax of the series doing its action and its storytelling well, while mixing in just enough comedy in there to not be traumatic to young children. Episode 5 also does a great example of setting up later plot points that never really get mentioned, but have a greater influence on the plot, such as we see Sin in a cage. She makes a little cage monster, specifically a bird cage, directly mirroring the fact that Uzi in this episode has taken control over a literal bird, while Sin seems to have her avatar hosted directly in the cage, and whatever was formerly inside has been corrupted by her influence. As well, this is the first episode we see Doll wearing her eye patch, which later in episode 7 is revealed that overuse of the solver causes degradation of the user's body if they do not have a fundamental understanding of it. And it's just something that's never fully said, but is a good callback. I don't want to be overly pedantic, but episode 5 is also when the best TikToks and edits came out for Murder Drones. I know this is a completely subjective opinion, but ranging from stuff that just completely accentuates the fun goober energy of Sin to the dramatic and emotional tragedy that was the Elliott family. I just think you really can't top what we were given during that episode, and it's marked in the fandom as such. Wow. Yeah, episode 5 is peak. F you to anyone that says otherwise.
You didn't have to see this.
Talking about episode 6 is kind of a hard nut to swallow, because as a retrospective narrative, it fits in really well, but as an individual episode, it's really weak, actually. The writing just goes in a really strange direction, and there really isn't any reason for it. There's a few things that I'll retouch upon later on while talking about episode 7 and 8. So I'm actually going to keep episode 6 pretty brief, because it's less like episode 5, but still in the same vein of it sets stuff up instead of paying them off in the episode, which you would think would be good, because that's what episode 5 does, but it just does it in a very contrived way. First and foremost is how they handle Doll this episode, and then the introduction of Alice and Bo. Those are two really big contentions for me. Oh, there's just a million things I feel like Liam could have done instead. The gang meets up with Tessa and Jay, quote unquote, and Doll after she stole the key bug from Uzi, and immediately, Doll betrays them and runs off with the key bug, and it makes no sense. She was already working with Tessa and Jay, so we know she's not averse to working with the murder drones, not averse to working with the human, so why does Uzi and her gang getting in the mix, you know, a murder drone and someone also infected with the Solver virus that they kind of want to figure out? She just immediately runs off with the key bug, like completely breaking whatever contract Tessa and her had that caused all this to happen, which doesn't really make any sense. And if Doll was hiding secrets or whatever, she could just not tell Uzi. But then the main gang also never questions it, never once. It's like, oh hey, you were just working with the girl that like stole the best lead we had to figuring out what's wrong with me. What's up with that? They never bring it up. They just kind of trust Tessa immediately. I mean, it makes sense for N and V. They are getting their memories back. They're like, oh, this is Tessa. This is our old friend, you know, the person who repaired us. We can trust her. Uzi has no reason to trust her. She was just working with Doll. That's like the most untrustworthy thing someone could do. Fast forward, if they stuck with this plot, I feel like they should not have introduced Alice and Bo. Doll should have been the main antagonist of this episode, along with the Sentinels, with this direction. But if they stayed as a group, if Doll never like diverged off, and maybe we got some talking from Uzi and Doll, which would have been really good character development, then they probably could have kept Alice and Bo. Because the only reason that Alice and Bo are here is because they need a one-off villain. This whole series has had the underlying threat of Sin, but now Sin's directly next to the main cast working with them. Unknowing to the main cast, of course, but so Sin can't be the main threat or the underlying threat or the reason that the threat happened. So they kind of just shove these new characters into the mix, and the only thing that they add is, I feel like, a plot that got retconned, because once again, Alice reaffirms, similar to what Sin did in Eldritch J form in episode 2, that hey, maybe Nori wasn't all that cool. You know, she killed a bunch of people.
Nori, right? Sure thought killing all them folks was pretty slick.
Completely neglecting the fact that Alice is shown to be a part of the same like science experiment program that Yeva Nori were. So she knows they're experimenting with this Eldritch virus and it has a tendency to possess its users. So why does she act like Nori killed a bunch of people? It doesn't line up in the greater narrative. And if they wanted to keep Alice and Bo, one, Doll should have stayed with the main cast. But then that leads into episode 7 in that we shouldn't have got Nori back. Or at the very least, she shouldn't have been so, oh my god, I'm just an aloof mom, you know, that's trying to make up, you know, for my mistakes. Because they paint her like she's going to be almost an antagonistic force, but then she just isn't. And just looking back, the episode itself is a huge bit of nothing burgers, of conflict for the sake of conflict, and doesn't really stand on its own. What it does do really well, though, and while it doesn't explain everything, it adds stakes to the series. There really hasn't been a real, dire threat in the whole Murder Drone series until now. Episode 6 really puts that home. Uzi starting to lose herself to Sin and the Solver, quickly losing complete control of herself. Complete possession is starting to happen, and Uzi's desperately fighting to keep her wits about herself and keep her friends alive while they're in danger, and she needs to use this power because otherwise she's just a worker drone with nothing else, to fight back with. So Uzi's just in this constant state of desperation, and she's falling victim to this possession because of it. Meanwhile, she's separated from her emotional support dog, and they're being tortured. I mean, Uzi gets her finger gnarly cut off.
Wait, stop! Seriously? What are you talking about?
And they try to jam character development in for V at the very end, and it feels very hollow. But big thing was the reveal of what happened to Earth. And while I have my ifs about it, I am a firm believer in that the human plotline on Earth was probably the most compelling little tease, and then just knowing it's gone and dusted most likely is a little bit disheartening. But seeing what the Solver can do, it can destroy planets, and Uzi's getting possessed by it, and she's very quickly losing her entire self to it, really hits home that they need to figure something out, and fast. They can't find Doll, they're being tortured, there's drone sentinels that are designed specifically to destroy Solver units, hunting the disassembly drones, and the main cast. They're pressed up against the wall, they're cornered rats. Earth is gone, the Solver can destroy planets, and Uzi's almost fully possessed. It's heartbeat level scary, but without the horror. And I think that's where episode 6 stands its best on, is that it adds real stakes, a real threat, a real reason for them to figure this out, instead of jauntily going throughout their life and having the main plot be proverbial B-plot in their heads. This is also where we get a reveal that I kind of want to dissect, but when Tessa shows and pictures on the computer of satellite imagery of Earth, as well as J.C. Jensen files of post-Gala massacre with human Tessa alive, or at the very least enough human of a Tessa that a drone's human features sensor protocol is still running on, and that the Elliott Mansion was the site of the core flesh pit that Sin used to destroy the planet on. And we know Sin's not a good actor. While she's pretending to be Tessa right now, she's kind of really obvious. We know Tessa was kind of a drone-obsessed goober, but looking back, it was kind of strange. She was going...
Human made security, this experiment can control.
You don't really see Tessa doing any of that.
There's humans coming. I've only ever yanked robots, Jay.
That was a really good little, hey, start looking at the facts, because this was the one plot point that Liam had down from the very beginning, and he does it really, really well. I was a firm disbeliever in the Tessa is Sin theory for the longest time, and I am pleasantly surprised I've been wrong. But we get the most sincere statement from Sin that I think we get in the whole series, coming from Tessa's voice.
All they did was spread it.
The Solver to other hosts, and then try to patch it, keeping these godlike powers to other hosts that aren't her. I think that was the primary catalyst of this universal genocide. Was Sin is on top of her world. A galaxy, a universal throne is hers. But now, what stragglings of humanity on these other planets that she attacks, and especially on the copper systems, are trying to completely undermine her power. She just exploded Earth. She must be experiencing a villain high, because we know this little goober's a psychopath. But they're still fighting back, and that must have made her very angry. And I'm going to make a lot of callbacks, because I feel like this episode sets up the Solver's motive, but there's just so much brick walls that you run into when you try to explain why Sin's doing what she's doing, that it just doesn't fully make sense. And that's why I'm like, oh, it's good, but it's not. Oh, but at least it added stakes, something the series desperately needed. Because you have a lot of things that don't make sense. If Sin wants Uzi dead, why does when she possesses her save her and V from the Sentinels? Which, just moments before, I always thought the Sentinel killed Bo. but it killed Bo, but you also see it shoves its face into the oven with the solver core and is eating them. It's not feasting on Bo, it smashes Bo and then starts feasting on the cores. That's why we never see any other eldritch monsters throughout the series. Either that or they forgot about it, but it really looks like that the anti-drone sentinels weren't anti-disassembly drones, but anti-solver drone. And I mean, yeah, that's what they're defending against in the Cabin Fever labs, but I think it was specifically as a deterrent, not against the experiments, but from Sin's ambitions.
Because initially we think, oh, the murder drones were created by humans. Spoilers, they weren't. And so we're like, okay, but what if I'm a human, what would I then kind of invent to fight off that threat? Like, what would my version of an intentional like creature meant to specifically combat those types of robots be?
On a separate point, Sin also tries to manipulate N, something that also doesn't really make sense. I mean, in the next episode, they're alone, and Tessa could have very much just destroyed N and then booted up his backup.
Too bad you've served your purpose. Don't worry, your backups will forgive me.
While we didn't know that at the time, it really felt like there were still humans out there, and there was a legitimate moral baggage that Tessa was trying to put onto N, which I think is good. It never pays it off because we find out things later. So it's like, oh, well, this was happening. Oh, no, brick wall. Oh, why did Sin save Uzi? Oh, maybe because we need a host. She needs a different host that isn't herself to sacrifice for the ritual. Episode 8, she's trying to kill Uzi the whole time. You know, it's like, oh, but she's trying to callback ping her. Then she kind of just settles on killing them. Oh, if she needs a host, why doesn't she just unnerf the solver and the disassembly drones? We see that in episode 7. And it's just, there's a lot of brick walls. And it really makes episode 6 be like, I can see why you guys kind of delayed the next 2 episodes while you figured things out. And of course, we get the Newsy reveal and a little bit of that V character growth that we needed. Not enough. I feel like we should have gotten a little more in episode 5. But this is where the Tessa character, comes to an end as you know it, because we get what happens next. But we can assume that Sin is at least acting in somewhat accordance to how Tessa would. While not great, we see that she would have been like an amazing addition to the series as a human character if they did go that route, which is something I still debate in my head that I kind of wish they kept. But overall, it's kind of an up and down, lots of greens, a lot of reds, but episode 6 adds stakes and pressure, which the series desperately needed, and while it set pieces for a lot of lore, doesn't fully pay them off by the end of the series. I think it's a great direction that they started, finding the narrative line they wanted to get to and started heading towards it, instead of having this mysterious jumble that they'd been doing for most of the whole series up until they really grasp it. Despite having nothing burger story in this episode, making it feel hollow, episode 6 does something that I truly believe hasn't been fully realized since the first episode, in that it sets real tone, a strong atmosphere, has a great general overlay of the story, and pulls on your heartstrings, particularly because of the scene with V that unfortunately gets undone by the finale. It's something that we haven't really seen go along with the stakes that have been set by this episode since the pilot, and it's a breath of fresh air despite the fact that the story until concluded is a nothing burger. Episode 7, Mass Destruction. Here's where some of the stuff from before that I've kind of tossed around as, oh, this might be the case, really starts to stop being mights and becomes yeses. Firstly, we get the confirmation in this episode that confirms the singularity theory. The absolute solver is a technological amalgamation that is trying to self-replicate, expand, and assimilate, seemingly growing more intelligent as it goes along, and ultimately has an end goal of restarting the universe, some like mass entropy project. And we get that, like with this whole story that we've seen, that I have a new appreciation for, actually, in a background document. a bunch of visual background stuff is where a lot of stuff is referenced to. Just like we probably have a reason why we never see the Absolute Solver abilities ever directly used on a murder drone, because they have the nerfed Absolute Solver, and we know Absolute Solver units are non-interactable. Would kind of pay credence to, oh yeah, these things are meant to murk rogue solver units if they kind of get out of hand and aren't being possessed by their master, despite the blocking bullets and magic powers that would otherwise stop that. But this also lays the foundations for making episode 6 kind of make sense and letting me open up to the series. The big thing is this plot point is never fully addressed in episode 7 or in the next episode, episode 8, but we get at least one blurb in episode 8 that kind of confirms it. But we'll get to it when we get there. Episode 7 is kind of just the episode that pays off everything that 5 set up. Like, 5 tells you Sin probably made the disassembly drones, probably ordered them to do these sort of mass genocides, but there was just enough by the time episode 5 ended that you couldn't say for certain. Nope, episode 7 confirmed it. She made them, led the genocide on Earth, led the universal expansion, consumption, assimilation. We got basically a confirmation that it was N that killed Nori, and they completely brushed it under the table, which is very much on par for this series. Just Nori going,
"Hey, you look familiar. Watch the road. You got wings." I guess. Focus.
And then no more. That's it. It's like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, so it was N. We never see it. We don't get a flashback. But hey, at least we know that Uzi's dating her mom's presumed murderer. It's pretty cool. Pretty hardcore, very edgy, very angsty, very Uzi. But this is where the establishment of the solver needs a host that's other than Sin comes into play. Because Sin is fully integrated with the Absolute Solver, which we will see next episode. But this adds to the reason why Sin saved Uzi in episode 6, and why she's hunting down Doll, who's a lot more emotionally stable and can hold off the possessions a lot easier than Uzi can, and why Doll is a lot more of a real threat to Sin than we've ever really been let on. It explains why Sin's coming to Copper 9 of all times. She's got corpse spires all over these planets, but none of them have reactivated with the Absolute Solver, so she hasn't been able to possess any of them. And the humans that were experimenting with the Absolute Solver on the planet made a patch that took Sin's control away, that gave them their individuality back, that ripped them out of the Google Drive.
Had my suspicions. Thought they kept cutting my feed.
So now she's coming to Copper 9 to finish the job. But just so happens by the time she landed, 2 new hosts popped up. And now she's already on planet, so plans gotta change. Which would also explain the disassembly drones to begin with. They're more than an army. They're meant to stack corpses, get more hosts, and defend the big boss from being murked, because Sin ain't that special. Sin's exorable. Sin can die. Sin is just as powerful as any other host, and so she needs to protect herself. That's why coming to Copper 9 was her biggest risk, and why she probably didn't do it for at least 20 years, waiting for something to happen that could allow her to do it from the safety of wherever. And we also get the confirmation, murder drones have that nerfed solver. It helps with the control, and basically got the confirmation that from episode 5 as well, Uzi now being the admin means that N and V are out of Sin's control. They're completely independent, they're completely autonomous again, and that's also a big threat, because something that Sin also can't directly interact with her powers is also a danger to her, which I think now sets up the fight scene in episode 8 making a lot more sense now, with Sin really having to rely on her horror factor to get things going where they need to. This is where we see Sin really torture Uzi. Throughout the episode, she's really paying off the dividends from episode 6 as well, really putting her through emotional trauma. I'm fully convinced that Sin would have dragged En all the way to the chapel just to kill him in front of Uzi. She's desperately trying to cause her emotional distress, getting her to drop her guard so Sin can take a quick possession. She's constantly doing it. After seeing her mom, controlled in the video footage, Sin's like immediately in, and then Uzi has to resist. Sees Doll die, flickers again, then Tessa shows up, and Uzi's just freaking out. I mean, she's spawning solver parts. It really pays into the credence that, it's emotional distress. When you're not on your A game, another solver unit can jump into your systems. Same with Uzi, and we'll see that again at the start of episode 8. And the thing that really calms them down is after Sin takes full control, after nearly dying, the most emotionally distressing part, being possessed, forced to fight her mom and her boyfriend, her robo boyfriend. For the longest time, I couldn't realize how Uzi got into space after they got dragged down the flesh hole, but the Absolute Solver can teleport. We saw that with Doll, and we see it with Sin as well. So I don't know why it took me so long for it to be stamped into my head. I was like, oh yeah, it just used teleportation. It's always been able to do that. We've seen that since Doll. There's only one thing I don't like about the Sin reveal in episode 7 is that it takes away from the horror that they were trying to establish in episode 8, but they do something different in episode 8 that's really awesome as well. But knowing that Liam Vickers from the longest time just wanted to get to the corpse robot, as he calls it, which pays credence to Sin and Tessa not being a skin suit, but being an assimilated hybrid, which you also see in episode 8, also make a lot of sense. And overall, episode 7 is basically a continuation of 5 and 6. It doesn't add anything, new to the table. It just pays off what was already there. And it does it really, really well. This is the lore episode. This is the one that ties the last loose ends. There's a lot of visual storytelling in the background. There's a lot of blurbs and gags and very one-off comments. It's like, oh yeah, here's the lore. Here's the story. We're finally putting it together. There's some bits and pieces that still don't make sense if you're binging the series with the knowledge. But after watching episode 7, you've got everything that you need to form a cohesive, this is the plot, the lore, and storyline of Murder Drones, and you can string it along with 90% coherent. And I appreciate this a lot, especially episode 7, really tying up those loose ends that originally you couldn't ascertain at first watch. Since episode 8 will be a lot of cool fight scene, and look at that, that just confirms what I was talking about in episode 7. I want to lay that this is where a lot of the narrative critique, starts to die down and turns into creative indulgence. Saying how you can enjoy it, but after going through all this lore, all the narrative aspects of the series, putting it together, I gained a new respect for it. It's actually surprisingly well put together. Is it formatted the best way? Oh, absolutely not. Your whole story should not be conveyed through background visual storytelling. That's, 99% of audiences aren't going to rewatch your series 30, 40 times, sometimes 3 times in a single setting, just to piece together the story once you have a whole season fully laid out. That's what I've been doing, and it finally makes sense after me and another person dissecting it like surgeons, watching each episode multiple times, taking hours to piece everything together. It's very much a storytelling device, and for what it is, it's done really well. But it's very much disjointed. There's a lot of flaws that you can see throughout the way that's like, oh yeah, they changed this along the way. They had to make this make sense, so they had to do this. They had to backpedal on this. Now, I know what you're thinking. I'm gonna tackle these 2 elephants in the room real quick. But yes, I know that the B team is here. I am going to talk about these guys, these 3 little dorks, in the next episode. Just want to acknowledge, yes, they are here. Yes, they are doing something this episode. But big supporting cast that we unfortunately get our swan song here is with Nori and Yeva. God, I feel like there is so much that could have been done with them. We're fed in episode 2, we're fed even more in episode 6, and episode 7 here shows that whatever was being set up there was tossed in lieu of finishing up the lore, making it mostly coherent, and getting the series over with. There is so so many implications between Nori and Yeva that I feel like could have been really awesome to expand upon. That would have been really cool to learn about, especially how Nori's amnesia post-collapse and potentially what happened to Yeva's mind, if anything, would have been really nice to know about, especially in this episode since they reintroduce Nori, who seemingly remembers everything again. But unfortunately, that's just not the route the show decided to take, and it's just a fact that we have to acknowledge and we have to lament that that isn't a part of the narrative. But hey, it was here, and at least we got the promotional art. At the very least, there's something big here that could have been. Unfortunately, it's just not what we're getting. But overall, for this being Liam's first official series, I am so glad that episode 8 got the recognition it did. And then, of course, the amazing digital circus having a trickle-down effect, because Murder Drones is actually really well put together. While it may be an amalgamation of everything Liam has ever done, ever put into a single piece of media, it is a wild ride. And if you take the time to appreciate it, it's a phenomenal series. So, time to get to the final episode section and just talk about, oh, how cool it is. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, that confirms that. Oh, so cool.
Oh yes, get snuck upon. Neck bite.
Oh Lord, he coming!
Episode 8, Absolute End. Let's go. The episode starts out with an Intermission Cube reference. What can I say? If you go watch Intermission Cube, if you want to see the biggest inspiration for Murder Drones, spend 22 minutes. Watch that. Because there it is. There it is. Beating heart, spiny looking things. But here's where we start getting the confirmations that make all the lore fully make sense. Nori on that meteorite confirms if you a little bitch, you're gonna fall to the solver. It preys off your emotions, confirming that theory that the solver needs a host and that Uzi needs to destroy Sin's heart. Acknowledges that they're separate entities and that they're kind of like coalesced together. And that Sin ain't gonna destroy the planet yet because she needs a host. She needs someone to do it because she can't sacrifice herself. It's like a demon ritual where the solver makes a black hole out of the body and eats up the planet, and Sin can't fully go through with that without another host, either to replace her body or to sacrifice instead of herself.
Then die mad, bitch!
Newsy.
Well, that's a serious issue. Before that wolf thing, we're, like, dating, right?
Oh, yeah,
Just
like
because
that
I
was the
can't always
plan.
read.
Like, yeah?
Yay.
Newsy. Newsy. One of my all-time favorite things now, which I did not notice on my first 27 watches of episode 8, is that once Sin reintroduces herself after breaking Uzi's null ball, and after saying,
"Hello, Uzi."
Hi, Em.
You kind of see her, trotting towards them through the foggy backdrop, that you kind of just see Sin's like eye visor color, and it's very muted, almost white, and the X's kind of merge into like a circular blurb. I can only imagine that it's N's human like feature sensor that they all have like reactivating, and he's watching Tessa walk towards him again, knowing that she's gone. And then it slowly refading back to Sin, amalgamized with his former friend and master. And that's just really cool. I never noticed it for the longest time. It was just really cool. Also, thanks to the other dubs while Sin is callback pinging Uzi this entire episode, on top of the fact that we see it's her taking control, other dubs call it pairing, like Bluetooth. She's trying to take control. She's like obsessed with possessing Uzi. Why? Because she needs a host. She wants to destroy the planet, but she doesn't want to die because she's the prime host of the solver. She needs to entropy the universe, and so she needs a tool, and the only one that's left right now is Uzi. And Sin is probably not going to wait another at least 5 years in hopes that some other drone that she's murked along the way wakes up, because she doesn't have that time. Not anymore. And, that's why she's constantly putting Uzi in these extremely high-stress environments, why she's taking the fight in her own hands, trying to tear apart N and, terrify Uzi. That's where N's character really comes to a crescendo. His whole golden retriever aspect of himself finally pays off, other than him just being attached at the hip to Uzi. This is him being attached at the hip and it having story significance. He helps ground Uzi, and in turn, she helps ground him when he's having a very traumatic break, remembering the Elliot massacre and what immediately happened after with his reconstitution and presumably semi-possession and then eventual war. If we can call what happened on Earth a war. And it just really pays off the two characters that we had been building towards, especially since episode 5 with the stakes that we had set with seemingly N is unbothered by his trauma, but it's just him.
I actively avoid unpacking how that works.
As he said in episode 2, which really shows that he's also grown very subtly into a point where he's okay with it. He's okay with letting that out and saying, I'm not okay. This is awful, this is horrifying, and I'm scared. And they help each other, and they love each other, and they build each other up. And it's what sets Uzi free. And I think that's really tossed under the radar when it comes to people not fully appreciating that episode 8 is kind of like, here's this really cool shit, and then here's some lore for you guys too, but look for it. Because that's what the series does. It's all subtle. It's all under the radar. You gotta be like, oh, I see what you did there. And this is also where we see that Sin, other than being fully merged with the Absolute Solver, isn't particularly special, and that all of her powers are shared amongst the other Solver units, hence why she's so afraid to get her hands dirty. She tries to call back ping Uzi. Uzi callback pings her. And it's one of the few times in this episode that we see Sin not smile, but show genuine concern, genuine fear, and genuine worry before recollecting herself. Putting on a tough face for the fight. It's because she realized, uh-oh, I'm not special. This thing has my powers, and it can challenge me. The only thing I have is that I'm merged with the powers that be. And particularly, this shows why she kind of thought that she would have the upper hand against Uzi. Because Uzi is very angsty, very ornery, very emotionally unstable and unregulated for most of the series, while Doll is a lot more collected, calm, and in control. It's why her possession is very slow. You don't see Doll start losing it until she starts losing. She starts failing missions. She starts having to chase Uzi instead of Uzi and the cast chasing her. And it's when she slowly starts breaking down from being alone that we see that, her eye breaks. So Doll becomes the expendable one. She's too dangerous. She won't be easy to possess. But Uzi is angsty, emotionally unstable, emotionally immature, teen-coded girl. That'll be an easy host to control. And so this moment where Uzi is finally really the scars on her psyche are gone. She's accepted herself. She loves herself, and she loves her new friends and family and situation in life. She's got it on lock. She may be cringe, but she's free. And now with, that control, that trust in herself and the people around her, Sin doesn't have an emotionally scarred teen to possess anymore. And it's another reason why Sin's probably on the back foot now. Also why she probably has a little too much fun with the fight. She's trying to make it overly zesty, in a sense. Trying to traumatize Uzi with holographing into N. Trying to desperately kill V, toying with N, doing anything to put things in her favor, especially since J gets knocked out of the fight very early. She needs N and V to go, and she needs Uzi to break. I don't think the fight would have ended at the point where it did, even if Uzi didn't grab Sin's heart. because he's still very much in emotional control. Uzi wasn't breaking, and Sin needed her. She needed that host. She needed that body. She needed to sacrifice something to destroy the planet. So as long as the others were there, they posed a distinct threat. So Uzi actually took the upper hand and kept it, which is something I don't think she could have done before, her character growth. This is also where I'm going to plant the theory that I don't think Sin is wearing a skin suit. Yeah, you see the seams, they're kind of seared and singed on, but Sin is the only one that goops to death. When Doll dies, gets core eaten, her body's still there. When Uzi gets semi-torn apart by V, her parts don't goop away. The old ones just rebuild. We even see in episode 5, Sin has ripped off her dragon skull tail thing before, and it's still around. But at this point, goops, and you see human hand bones and a rib cage and like part of a spine. You can't fit a drone and all of that inside skin. They'd be bulging, they'd be tearing. And a lot of the stuff on Sin's body isn't like tearing because of space. It's tearing because of damage, because she's not like careful with the body. She's slamming into transformers in the side of buildings. It's held together by solver powers. It's that amalgamation of flesh and machine. And it's less a skin suit and very much corpse drone, like human hybrid, almost like Sin's core got in and replaced Tessa's heart, like Intermission cube, and then just built a drone body after the assimilation of the other humans and drones. Created this living monster, this Picasso of terror. It also explains why Sin was initially worried about the Sentinels, but then couldn't get blue screened. Yeah, you can break a CPU or an operating system, can't break a brain, or I guess you can't break an eldritch monstrosity, because they can turn off N, which has the solver, but they can't get Sin. That's because Sin ain't entirely robot. There's a lot of biology in there. A lot of biology. Which also means that that drone body merged with the flesh could very well be Sin's or just a replacement body for her old one, especially since Tessa was taller than Sin. But we also know that Sin has the ability to reconstitute herself if she can reconstitute other drones. But Sin's unique in that matter, fully absorbed into the absolute solver, doesn't need a core to survive, just needs the black hole, likely because they've merged into one and created this monster body to share. They made that deal in episode 5. Sin was a little psychopath that wanted to murder humanity, and the Absolute Solver found the perfect instrument to achieve its singularity project, to consume and assimilate the universe. We see this with Sin and Doll still living inside Uzi. You see Doll's name flicker on Uzi's visor after she's getting possessed. You see the Solver download its code, and we see Sin in Uzi's tail. The Solver really doesn't discard you. It consumes you, it assimilates you, it keeps you a part of its universal design. And it expands and expands and expands. But we finally got the Solver's motive. We're not told outright, and we got Sin's motivation for doing it and having fun along the way. I think episode 8 does exceptionally well with very subtle lore drops that fill in just some final gaps in the series. One of them being that the connection between Sin and V is finally drawn in the sand after she gets barreled by Jay into the side of the facility, a part of the lab, and mentions that she knew everything the whole time.
Tessa, it's Sin. She's here, and I don't know how much you remember, but Jay tricked us. Or it tricked Jay too. And I'm so sorry. I should have been honest, but I was just so scared for us.
Which is only a little confusing because her admitting that she made a deal with Sin undoes that kind of weird line in episode 4, at least 50% of it. It still made it seem like she was attacking her employer. But it also makes it seem like if she knew everything from the start, why were her memories being wiped away in episode 5 if she was already cognizant of everything that happened and was using that knowledge, that horror, to protect N. It's one of those few things where throughout the series it's never fully rectified because it was probably handled after the fact, but we get that nice little lore drop finishing it off. Also, just a slight aside, now that we're at episode 8, throughout the series, Sin is referred to in the closed captioning as the Solver, while we know from internal data from their Discord server and the Gochin blog posts that they always just refer to any form of sin as sin. And then you kind of cross-reference that with the line in episode 5 of
the solver of the absolute fabric, the void, the exponential end.
It almost makes it feel like a title, almost. We know that Absolute Solver and Sin are separate entities, at least to some regard, but it really makes it seem like once Sin fully assimilated with the Solver, she kind of took on its grandiose nature and took its titles for herself. Very similar to what Uzi is going through now with her essay just screaming, "I am God, I am God, I am God." On another note, I really like the characterization of V and J in this episode. Adds a huge depth to their character, and while I very much agree, mostly, with all the people that cried out for the lack of Jay's story, I think it is a plot that ultimately is irrelevant. We don't fully need Jay's motivation, we don't need her whole background story, but from the few lines we get, it makes it an extraordinarily tantalizing mystery to try to dissect. Why did Jay betray humanity and Tessa? Why is Jay being complicit in a universal omnicide? How many times has she really died and come back, and what does that process look like, and why does it scare her so much? How was she tricked by the Solver? And the line to V saying,
"You know there's no escape, even in death!"
implies also, probably, not for sure, because she could just be referencing herself, that V has died at some point as well and come back. Which really adds to, were the disassembly drones damaged on Earth at some point and rebooted? On some of the other planets that supposedly the Solver attacked? And then especially the
Offer rescinded! Here I thought you stepped it up after.
Or during.
I never needed either of you.
Episode 7, when we see that Ed has his flashback, and his loyalty to Sin was primarily because of the Absolute Solver program inside of him controlling his actions, his feelings, and what he was doing. He has that horrible recollection of what he did, and we see V and J shoot and eat a person, and from that line we know that she was conscious. She had such a horrendous experience that caused her to have such a psychopathic change of heart that she became willing to do that to people. And while humans are portrayed horrendously, morally, in this series, I find it hard that someone characterized as sweet and innocent and kind as V when she was still a worker drone, then turned into this maniacal murderer. It adds a strong depth to her character and also to the Absolute Solver. What could that thing have possibly done to her that she now prioritizes herself and N above the lives of all things in the universe, and is willing to do literal war crimes to ensure that that safety is secured above all else? It really makes me freeing for more story about Tessa and Jay and humanity, and it makes episode 5 extremely tantalizing in retrospective. I think they're just handled exceptionally well. It plugs up the last little holes in the lore. A last little bit of lore that I think ties up one of the loose ends that we get from episode 2, where the Solver kind of refers to itself as a hive mind using we. Whenever we see Sin now, it's referred to as I instead of we, singular, not plural, is that Sin might directly be referencing both herself and the Absolute Solver, sharing the host body of the flesh corpse robo hybrid abomination assimilation that she currently has. So by the end of this episode, while people think it wasn't as lore heavy as we wanted it surprisingly gave us enough tidbits to really put the lock and key on the story, especially with the fact that Sin seems to be obsessed with whatever reason to get a host. So I said I would talk about the supporting cast here, and while these 3 morons don't do anything of real value in this episode, they do tie up character arcs. It's quite ironic that thanks to Nori instilling the idea of doors into Khan.
She was always all, build doors against the coming sky demons. The singularity awakens. Look at this cool S I can draw.
Khan is able to save N from Sin, who is the individual that killed his wife. And then Thad's just a bro, and Lizzie gets her just desserts for being Lizzie. So they don't do anything, but they tie up their character arcs. Everyone gets their karma / happy ending. There's a few things that, still can be said. Jay makes some passing thoughts, to V about...
It tricked you! If I promised you anything, it tricked me too.
What made Jay, break her loyalties to Tessa? Was it because she saw her assimilated? Was it because Sin made a deal to maybe bring her back? We never really know. Why would Sin kill and assimilate Tessa after saying she wouldn't discard her unless, regardless of the galas, whether she participated in being there or not, if she was still going to get assimilated, is still unsure. That also makes that picture that we see in episode 6 still have a toss-up as, oh, Tessa didn't die at the gala, she died later. Or, oh, that's just Sin with her fresh new body. I'm still not sure about that. And it's unfortunate that we don't get our family reunion, the Dorman family coming together. And it is a little unfortunate that we have to rely on the subtext for the main villain's motivation. We don't get Sin outright saying why she's doing this. We don't get the Absolute Solver explaining why it wants to assimilate and consume the universe, but we can kind of parse it together that Sin's a little psychopath, that it's a vengeful little creature, and the Absolute Solver is the singularity theory, and those two things together pair like a 5.56 into an assault rifle. Murder Drones originally, as the show released, seemed like it had a very disjointed story, an overly creative while underdeveloped story writing technique. But when you go back retrospectively and you really start taking in frame by frame and analyzing the greater plot, you see that it was a 3-year creation that paid dividends. While the only continuous lapse in clear story comes from the pilot, since we know for sure that there have been story divergences, there have been rewrites, and there have been changes, the only continuous outlier is some things that were established in the pilot episode that never really get elaborated on to disprove them. By the end of the series, it doesn't seem like as hefty a retcon, and it seems like there is a cohesive example to explain why things were said or did in those moments. The story is fragmented. You get your A-plot, and you have to focus on that, because that is all that the story in the foreground will give you. The background will continue to give you everything else to parse together this long, elaborate story. And that is why I really wanted to wait until the end of the series to do something like this. Because in the moment, many episodes felt hollow, they felt unimportant, and they felt confusing. But now at the end, I have a very big appreciation for what Murder Drones is. And I really think it shows how much Liam learned along the way. He obviously had to dig himself out of some holes, but you see throughout the process there was growth, there was new admiration, and the story very much entered a parallel with itself where the background and the foreground started feeding into each other instead of trying to catch each other up. Murder Drones is not perfect, but Murder Drones, both creatively and narratively, is incredible. And while it could have taken its beats narratively in a better stride, it is a fun ride, it is a phenomenal story, and I am so glad that Glitch is going to continue to grow and that many of their series are getting spotlights because it means more people will also be able to see Murder Drones even now that it's over, because I think people who get into Murder Drones now are going to have the best version of it, where they can come out of it feeling fulfilled and not grasping for straws like a lot of us early fans had to do. The series is not perfect. I'm going to say watch the series, make a critique for yourself on how it feels to you. But if you took the time to sit here and watch my video, I very much appreciate it, because I think Murder Drones is a ride that is worth taking. It was an indie revolutionary, and by the end of its story, it is a surprisingly intriguing, enthralling, and just fun story to be a part of. Alright, tier list time. Episode 1, it's a solid C+. It builds the world, it has a strong pacing thanks to its long runtime, it establishes the niche and the story writing techniques of the series. It uses a strong atmosphere and tone to establish the narrative. It is, however, unfortunately a victim of its time and has many glaring signs of the narrative being built after this episode rather than before. Episode 2 is a D. It ends up being an episode which does absolutely nothing but set up Doll as an antagonist at the end of the episode. The J centipede adds no narrative value, as a sin monster or centipede never shows up again in any meaningful fashion. Thus, any stakes or influence on the story is not important and doesn't affect the world in any way, shape, and form. And whatever lore it does add is ultimately retconned or explained out of the story. Episode 3 is a B+. This is where the real story of Murder Drones seems to begin. It introduces a real antagonist to create that call to action for the main cast. It furthers the story and the character arcs of the main trio, and introduces the Absolute Solver in a meaningful way through the use of Doll and its activation in Uzi. And in its final moments, it gives us the first glimpse of the main antagonist of the series, turning it from a passive force into an active one. Episode 4 is also a B+. It follows many of the narrative and story structures of Episode 3, but also includes the stakes of the Absolute Solver with everything that's happening to Uzi in the episode. It starts setting up the Sin story beats throughout Uzi fighting V, and with Doll and Sin stalking the cast, particularly N. It gives us the most meaningful character moments of Uzi and N, and a little bit of V, caused by them all being separated throughout the episode, establishing much of the forward and underlying plot and the character arcs that will get them to have a meaningful impact on that plot. Episode 5 is S. While it revolves around a background storytelling that the series is now known for, it uses it perfectly, setting up the story beats that would be paid off in the next 3 episodes, giving the viewers directly those answers beforehand, while also allowing you to carry enough of a shadow of a doubt to not fully embrace it as fact until those later episodes. It adds stakes both in the present and the past. The atmosphere remains tense for much longer, allowing you to breathe in between the jovial moments and the tense ones, and manages many establishing plot lines with one of the shorter runtimes of the series without feeling too rushed. And most importantly, it pays off much of those character journeys from all the characters present in the episode, especially between Doll and Uzi having this back and forth between the last 2 episodes, while also adding a lot of underlying plot lines that would come to be paid off in later episodes, particularly between Sin, V, and N. Episode 6, as a standalone, is not very good, but when you look at it as a narrative whole, it can be a toss-up between a B+, a B, or a B-. It's a nothing burger episode that doesn't really add anything new to the narrative plot line, especially with the misuse of Doll in this episode, except for a potential tease of a plot line, the only glaring plot hole that hasn't fully been established. However, even though Alice and Bo are eventually explained out of the plot, since their main priority was to establish a threat other than Doll or Sin, as well as further some of Nori's story, it gives the first teases of Tessa not being who she says she is, as well as has a consistently tense and dark tone that the series has not shown since the first episode, and it adds the real bit of direct stakes to the main cast from the Absolute Solver and the Hunting Sentinels, which is something that the series had very much been lacking, a real fear that the main cast could be in any real tangible danger. Episode 7 is an A. It is the sister episode of episode 5, closing up many of the loose ends of the lore that had gone untucked for both for a long time and whatever was recently established with that episode 5. It solidifies the lore drops that were hinted at in episode 5, and it finally introduces the main antagonist, Sin, to the forefront of the story. It finishes building up the world of Copper 9 for the audience. It gives the supporting cast any real narrative importance, and thus giving them value for being in this story other than Con, Lizzie, and Thad being characters that have no reason to be in the story up until now. It also manages to reveal story beats that allow the stakes of the episode to remain on high, much like the previous episode, without there truly being an active enemy to pursue until the end of the episode, since Doll dies mostly away from the main cast members. And it has one of the best pacings in the series, particularly thanks to its longer runtime, allowing the narrative to settle in the viewer without you forgetting anything that was set up beforehand or a few minutes prior. Episode 8 is also an A. It struggles with pacing, but it finishes much of the remaining lore holes that episode 7 couldn't get to in its runtime, allowing the lore of the universe to be fully cemented within the first 10 minutes of the episode, allowing the final fight to be enjoyed without, mostly, needing to sit down and ask why. It is a crescendo of the character arcs that have been going throughout the series, making V, Uzi, N, Jay, and Sin all feel like independent characters in the series with their own motivations and goals that don't all directly rely on the character of another. And it manages to juggle both the tension and the cringe internet awesome energy of the series without feeling jarring like it has with earlier episodes. While the supporting cast don't really add anything meaningful to this episode, it is overall an extremely well done ending for the series.
That's my girlfriend!
Also, now I can do this!
Wow, that was a really long video. Thank you to anyone and everyone that managed to make it this far. I know almost 2.5 hours is insane, and I don't envy anyone that had to go through that, because I know the audio issues were shittily done. I tried so hard to fix that. That was my biggest contention with this. So if you got through the ups and downs of audio leveling, I really much appreciate it. This took like 9 months to make. I don't think I could do a 2-hour one again. I'd have to separate it. Oh my god. I've been fighting this. I've been fighting the river, gamers. But I guess y'all deserve a reward for this. What could be worth almost 2.5 hours of hearing me drone on pedantically about Murder Drone's lore? I know. And Prague is canon!